Hello, and welcome to this deep dive on the newly released SAS Visual Analytics API. This is an awesome endpoint that enables us to do a lot of automation around SAS Visual Analytics, from creating new reports, updating them, and also exporting them in loops, for example. If you want to learn more, stick around because I have a lot of goodies for you in store to check out. So let's dive right in. First up, let's start on the developer.sas.com page. And we are on the starting page. If we scroll down a bit, we find the category Visualization and Reports. That's, of course, where Visual Analytics APIs will be located. And the new endpoint is called Visual Analytics. So let's check it out. Here we find on the right-hand side the major categories of new API endpoints available to us. Export for exporting the report, for example, as a PDF or as a report package. Jobs, which enables us to asynchronously export reports. And then the report endpoint, which will enable us to manage the lifecycle of a report. So creating it, updating it, and deleting it. So that's super awesome. Let's first start with the report endpoint and just take a quick look at what's available here. First here we have the report creation, we have the updating of a report, and the deletion of the report. And the kind of bonus API endpoint to copy a report. Let's start digging into these different endpoints. And for this, I've prepared a little SAS notebook that we will walk through step by step to understand how these API operate and how you can leverage them in your business. Now, all the examples that are written in this notebook are written in proc HTTP, which is of course the native integration within the SAS language. If you are looking, for example, in Curl, Python, R, or other languages, then developer.sas.com has you covered. If you click on the individual endpoints, you will find the documentation for each of those. So here we will focus on SAS, but don't fear, all the other languages are available on the documentation page. So we will be diving through this, and the first thing we of course need if we're working with SAS Visual Analytics is some data. So here I've created a simple script that just loads the very common and well-known cars dataset from SAS Help into our public CAS library so that we can start working with it. If you follow along, then this whole example is self-contained, so you can run it on your own machine. You don't have to load any dataset from anywhere else or any other assets. Next, we are now going to create our own first report. As you can see, I have detailed documentation attached to each cell to help you understand what's going on, but here we are not going to read that, rather we will be walking through the code. The first thing we of course need is to grab the SAS VA host URL. Now, there is, of course, a common option within SAS to retrieve that, so we do this programmatically. Next, any good report needs a name, so we provide this in a macro variable, and then we can also add a way to resolve naming conflicts. If you've created the same report or the same name of a report in SAS Visual Analytics before, you might have noticed that SAS automatically adds one in brackets after the name. That's the renaming kind of resolution strategy. You could also abort or replace, depending on your needs. And then we also need to tell SAS where to save the report to. There needs to be a location within SAS content where this report lives. And just so that you can easily replicate this on your own system, I chose the My folder, which always resolves to, well, your My folder. But you can put any folder URI in here, not just My folder. Then we create the input data that we are sending off to the SAS via endpoint, where we have to specify the result folder, the report name, and the conflict resolution. And that's all the data the API needs to do this. And finally, we are running proc HTTP, where we have a post method in here. And just to jump quickly back to the documentation, you can see create a report has the post method tag beforehand. And also if we click into that endpoint, you will also find this whole data specification that I just showed you, like the result folder, result report name, and conflict resolution in this documentation, right? This didn't just fall out of my head. And then we, of course, with SAS always have to authenticate. Now you can leverage your existing SAS session to do that. So this is the SAS service one. There is a link to the documentation explaining this in more detail. So let's run this and see what happens here in the background. So we can scroll through the log. We can see my VA host name. And then we can also find a note in here that says 201 created. That's an HTTP status code. And to make it more explicit, I have a second cell underneath it that will help us identify if any issues occurred while working with it. So you can see here, I checked the created macro variable containing the status code to check, hey, is this 201? So it's successful. If not, let's put a warning in the log. And then we also want to retrieve and generate the link to our report so we can start looking at it. So let's run the cell and take a look at the result. Here you can see we have the ID of the report, we have its name, we get its full URI, and again its folder URI. And up at the top of this ODS title, I put the kind of the deep link into your report, so you can just copy that, head on over to your browser, insert it, and SAS Visual Analytics will route us directly to our report. So here we can see reporting on car sales. And if we open up this report, there is no data inside. We haven't added the data set yet. There is no objects inside, but there is a page called page 1 in it. So that's kind of what we get for just creating a report. Let's close this out because we want to work with it programmatically. So let's continue on. And now we can go to update a report. Now, there is a lot of things that you can update, and I will only be walking through some of the aspects here. The full notebook has a lot more details on it, but just to give you an overview, we can add data to our report. We can update an existing data set, so replace it with another one, for example, or if a new column was added, or you updated the labels, right? So all these updates are pulled in. You can change the data, so replacing data sources with each other. You can apply a data view to your source, which is an awesome way. And if you are not familiar with data views yet, there's a link to the documentation to dive deeper. We can add pages and objects to our report. We can update objects. So for example, we could change the title of a bar chart, or we could change out the axes definitions. And we can set parameter values for our report. This is going to come in handy later on. Now, when working with the SAS Visual Analytics API, one concept that is important to us is that you always make sure that you are certain that you can override changes. If you're working within Visual Analytics, that's kind of handled for you in the background. But in the APIs, you always need to confirm that you know the latest kind of changed state that has occurred, and SAS will challenge you on that state. This is called an E-tag more commonly in web development. If you want to learn more, there is more information in here. But essentially SAS, every Visual Analytics report in SAS has an E-tag. And when you want to make a change to an existing report, you are challenged to give that E-tag, because otherwise it just will say, hey, you don't know when the last change occurred, so we can't allow you to just override any changes that occurred in the meantime. Are you kind of to prevent you from overriding stuff that you weren't familiar with? So in order to handle this E-tag stuff, I have introduced a custom macro in here that you kind of compile once and then you're going to see all over the place. But just think of this as being able to get this E tag so that we can say, hey, we know when the last change occurred. We are fine with overriding it. Go ahead, let me do it. So let's run this. And this gives us no output other than we now have this macro available to us. And now we are going to the first operation, adding a page. Now, adding a page, you just need to add a name and a position to our report where we want that page. And 0 is always the first page in the report. And then you can see we are adding an operation here. Every change to a report is called an operation. So we are adding a page. We give it the page name, the page position. Then we get this E tag. And then we are sending this off to the endpoint, again using the authentication, sending in our new data, and then looking at the results. So let's run this. And we shouldn't be getting a warning here, hopefully, if we didn't make any mistake. But if we do, you can see again here we have a check that kind of ensures that everything worked okay. And if we scroll through the log, here we get find the report at, and here is the link to our report again. I think it's very handy that you put in these checks and balances for understanding what changed within your report as you're working through the API, at least the first couple of times. So here we see we have a new page called car sales, and it's the first page in our report. So exactly what we specified within our API call. Let's close this out and soldier on. And I'm gonna start picking up the pace as we move through these things because the essential building blocks are staying the same. We are just changing the type of operation we are doing. So now we're going to add a data source. For this, we have to specify the CAS server. We have to tell it in which CAS library is our table, and then what's our table called. And of course, this operation is called add data. So let's run this. And again, we have this check here in the background, right? You kind of see what I meant with building blocks repeating itself. And let's open up the report one more time just to check, was the data source actually added? So let's open up the data pane, and indeed our data set, the sashelp.cars data set that we loaded into CAS is now available to us. So perfect, works as designed. Let's continue on and start adding objects. Now, you're of course familiar, hopefully, with the objects pane in SAS Visual Analytics and are familiar that it's quite long. You can add almost all of them. There are some exceptions, that's why there is a list in here, but also please check the documentation page as it will be also updating when new objects become available through the API. But there is the tables, the graphs, the geo items, controls, analytics, containers, content, statistics, and machine learning objects. So there is a lot of stuff to dive into. We are going to kind of keep things moving, so I'm not going to show you all the object types to add them in here, but we kind of want to look at least 3 of them, that being a text object in here, and for that we only need to specify the content we want it to contain. Then we have to tell it what else we want. I'm going to also add a list table and a bar chart to it. For that, I need things like columns that I want to add, and also more specifically for the bar chart, I need a category and a measure item, right? So that's what I'm specifying here. And we can actually daisy chain these operations. And the cool thing about daisy chaining them is if any of them fail, the whole operation will be aborted, which is super awesome to make sure that if you're changing a whole bunch of stuff, that you don't get stuck with some weird in-between state that you have to pass out again what has already been done, what was aborted. No. If one transaction or one operation fails within that list, the whole thing will be reverted to its previous state. awesome, really helpful while you're building out this stuff, so that you can make sure that your report is always functional at least. So let's run these 3 operations: adding text, adding a bar chart, and adding a list table. Not necessarily in that order, I don't remember the order. And let's check our report again, just to see, did it actually work? And then we can also confirm the order. Okay, so I did the text, then the list table, and then the bar chart. And this kind of, the order of these is also determined by the order of the operations. So you can kind of work through that. And let's close out our report again and head back here. Now we can also update our report. The kind of operations are essentially the same for this. And then we can also create copies of our report. So taking the full thing we had already built and just saving it under a different name and or in a different place. Here, for my case, I'm just going to add the copy to its name, so it's kind of obvious what has happened. But so depending on your use case, you might keep kind of a main copy in one place and then distribute its kind of children to different folders. So for example, you have some specific changes for different departments, or also just want to keep this report in multiple places to make access right management easier. So that's where this comes in. And now we are changing the API endpoint. So we were looking at this reports endpoint mainly. Now we are going to switch to the export/job one. Now they are, from their capability standpoint, they can essentially do the same thing behind the scenes. I'm gonna concentrate on the export one because we want immediate execution of our content. If you are more doing some stuff asynchronously, or you want to run the same operation over and over again, then the job one might be more helpful to you. But yeah, really is kind of more of a use case thing. The endpoints act almost identical at that point. So what can we do when exporting a report? We can get a PDF of the full report. We can get a report package. If you're unfamiliar with those, I highly recommend you check out the documentation. And then on an object level, we can also get them as SVGs, PNGs. We can get the data from objects, so Excel files, CSV file, or tab separated files. So awesome capabilities here. And what we are going to do in our first step, we will have to specify an export location and a file name, of course. So I'm just going to save these into the public folder in SAS content and call it export_carsales.pdf. So let's run this. And now this triggers behind the scenes, taking our report with the car sales page and turning it into a PDF. Let's switch to my SAS tab, go to SAS content, and let's minimize the other stuff. Go to public, and now we see here export car sales. So let's download this to my downloads folder. And let's open this up. And here we can see who it was created by. We can see our data objects in here. Perfect. That's now a PDF report. Let's close this out because we want to soldier on and come to maybe a common business task for you. You might want to export a report, but what you actually want to do is, in our case, we have the report for multiple regions, right? We have a Europe, Asia, and USA kind of origin data within our data set. And maybe in your world, it might be you have the same report, but you need to send each department their own PDF. So you want one version of the PDF for each department. That sounds like a looping job. So how can we do this? What we have to do is we kind of have to introduce some smartness into our report that I have detailed in here. And this is to help us create a filter on the data object so that we can change that filter programmatically through a parameter. And then after we change it, we can then export it. Now, the full description is in here. I'm just gonna snap my finger and we will be back with our report set up. If you want to follow these step by step, go through these steps here and you will have the same thing. So see you on the other side. So here we are. We have our report. Let me quickly show that to you. You should have now a filter both on the bar chart, as you can see here, and on your list table. If you don't, please go back and review the steps. So now let's run our code where we will be exporting this report in a loop for each distinct value that we have in the origin field. We are just pulling that with a proc SQL, having the different origins. And then we call a macro in a loop where we pass in the different origins and then generate an export of that report called export car sales. And then we have the value, so Asia, Europe, USA.pdf. So let's run this. So we expect here to be added 3 additional PDF files, and then we can go in there and check that these actually only contain the different data that we expected. So let's hit refresh, and indeed we got 3 additional PDFs. So let's just click download, move that into our downloads folder, and let's also pick the Europe one. Let's go into downloads. Asia only has Asia data in it, and Europe only has Europe in it. Also note that this gives us, in addition, these filters in the appendix. So very nice kind of overview of what actually happened behind the scenes. Now, let's finish things out by going ahead and showcasing just, we can of course also delete the report again, so we kind of leave no assets behind. And I highly recommend that if this is just a toy example for you, then please go ahead and delete assets, because otherwise in the future you will just be confused what this asset was, right? So clean up after yourself. And then there is also some additional resources in there just to help kickstart your journey to dive deeper and understand more. I hope you have enjoyed this deep dive into the new Visual Analytics API endpoint. It's a super powerful one that you can get really creative with and solve some very common business challenges to help automate your life further, and thus freeing up time for more interesting tasks than exporting PDFs. I hope you enjoyed this. See you next time. Bye bye.